Okay, slightly different title, Educating for Conviction, Open Minds. The topic's a bit orthogonal to the panel, but hopefully you'll see the relevance. I'm interested in a certain kind of puzzle, which is a tension that exists between two traits that I think we want to encourage in people, we think are valuable and important. One is that we want people to have conviction in their beliefs. We think it's important that people stand for something, to be authentic to what is important to them. This is obviously something which is very relevant to religious conviction and to religious freedoms and understanding those freedoms. But on the other hand, we also want people to listen to and respect others, even when they have very different viewpoints. And by this, I mean more than just tolerance. You can tolerate someone by letting them speak, but you don't have to listen to them. What I'm interested in is a certain kind of open-mindedness, a willingness to engage with others, to take them seriously, even when you disagree with them. And on the face of it, these two goals, these two values seem to be fundamentally opposed to one another. And in fact, I think increasingly we find this in debate with social media and in a technological information age. Increasingly, we find on the one hand, we have people who have strong convictions, not just religious convictions, but of course also it might be anti-religious convictions or convictions in other kinds of subject matter, would be climate change or social justice or what have you. And that conviction might manifest itself in an unwillingness to engage with others. And in fact, actually, I think the line of thinking goes that that's how one manifests one's conviction, that the mere willingness to engage with others reveals that one doesn't really have the conviction. So if one is willing to engage with others, then that must mean that one didn't have the conviction that one presented oneself as having. So how do we reconcile all these goals? I want to ask that question from an educational perspective, because that's the one I think is interesting. And I think if we go back to look at what the goals of education are, we can see how we might make these two apparently opposing values, how we might make them consistent with one another. So think about what the goals of education are. Obviously, education has many goals. Some of them are social, some of them are political, some of them are practical. But at least one important goal of education is epistemic. That is, we want to cultivate in our students certain epistemic traits, that they're good inquirers, they know useful information, they can reason well, and so on. And as many people have noticed, the most plausible way of understanding what the overarching epistemic goal of education is in terms of the development of intellectual character. Well, that means developing the subject's integrated set of intellectual virtues. Now, you can see how that's plausible by considering what the alternative might be. So one alternative, what's sometimes called pejoratively the bucket view of education, is that we should think about education as a student as like a bucket which we fill with facts and useful information and so forth, useful skills. Now, clearly we do want to do all that, but the idea that that's all we want to do with education doesn't look very plausible. It looks like a very a very old-fashioned and very pointless way of doing education. Rather, when we look at educational practices, they're precisely about getting, for example, students to think for themselves, to understand things for themselves, to reason well, and so on. Well, what are we doing then? Well, we're developing their intellectual character, and that means developing their intellectual virtues. These are admirable character traits like curiosity, intellectual humility, integrity, intellectual tenacity, and so on. Now, I won't go through all of these, but here's a sample of some of the traits that are associated with intellectual virtues. One key aspect of intellectual virtues is they incorporate a characteristic motivational state, a love for the truth, a respect for accuracy and for getting things right. So this is important because we can manifest skills in ways that are purely strategic. You know, you could teach someone to argue well in a fashion where what's important is just winning the argument, you know, like a sort of lawyerly way of arguing. It doesn't matter. You don't have to care about the opposition. You don't have to care about getting to the truth. You just have to care about winning. But that's not what the intellectual virtues are about. They're about reasoning, including reasoning with others, but also internally with oneself in a way where you're trying to get to the truth. The virtues are acquired and maintained in a distinctive fashion. We have to emulate exemplars. There's a process of habituation. You're not born with them. It's not like a light going on. One has to, as it were, go to the intellectual gym regularly and cultivate these traits. They lie between two vices, a vice of excess and deficiency. So think about curiosity. The vice of deficiency would be to be completely incurious, but there's also a vice of excess. That is to be interested in everything and nothing in particular. not to ask the right kinds of questions. So to be virtuous is to navigate between these two vices. And they have a special kind of value as well. They're instrumentally valuable, they're practically useful, but they're also, they're valuable intrinsically too. They're valuable for their own sake. They enable us to flourish as human beings. And they promote themselves, reason for themselves, and so on. So if we think of education as devoted to the intellectual virtues, how does that relate to our puzzle? Well, it shows us how we would cultivate certain character traits, have conviction in the right kind of way and have open-mindedness in the right kind of way. Remember, first is this overarching concern for the truth. That's going to mean arguing with integrity, right? So we're not just people who are going to be interested in merely winning arguments. We're going to be actually interested in the opposition, interested in understanding where they come from, because we care about the truth. And it's also going to drive curiosity as well. You know, we won't be closed off to other people, we won't be closed off to their viewpoints, because the mere fact that people have opposing viewpoints should pique our curiosity. We will have the intellectual tenacity, students have the intellectual tenacity to follow through on their deeply held beliefs, not simply capitulate at the first sign of obstacles. But that will go hand in hand with an intellectual humility. That is, to be an openness to counter evidence, to be respectful of others and their opinions. So I think if we can view the puzzle, the tension between these two traits that way, then we understand that what's going wrong, I think, in a lot of public debates about these issues is to understand these traits in a way disconnected from the intellectual virtues, such that they can be in tension with one another. If we understand them as embedded within the intellectual virtues, then I think we can see how they can be consistent with one another. And if we can make sense of that in educational practices, then in principle, we can make sense of it in society at large.